Steve Jobs was an innovative product visionary that helped create some of the most influential tech products of our time, but that doesn't mean every decision he made was right. From iPod socks to the hockey puck mouse, quite a few of Jobs' creations have been major flops. So in this video, we're going to find out 5 times when Steve Jobs was wrong. This is Greg with Apple Explained, and I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you'd like to help decide which topics I cover, make sure you're subscribed, and voting polls like this one will show up in your mobile activity feed. Let's start off the list by revisiting the year 2000, when Jobs made one of his earliest product missteps with the Power Mac G4 Cube. It came just 4 years after his return to the company, and after a string of successful products like the iMac, iBook, PowerBook, and Power Mac. And that was important, since Jobs had already proven to be a competent leader capable of returning Apple to profitability. But he missed the mark in 2000, when he revealed the Power Mac G4 Cube. Jobs said the idea came from his own desires as a computer user. He told Newsweek, quote, "I want the cinema display, but I don't need the features of the Power Mac." What he was referring to was Apple's desktop tower for power users, the Power Mac G4. It was released a year earlier and offered quite a bit of power for the reasonable price of $1,600. For customers who didn't need that extra power, the iMac offered a great desktop experience for $300 less. But Jobs thought there was a market between those two products, users who wanted the high-quality cinema display from the Power Mac G4 without all the bells and whistles of a full-size tower. So he set out to create the perfect product for that segment of users, by miniaturizing most of the Power Mac G4's components into an 8-inch cube suspended in a clear enclosure. Its design was absolutely stunning, and it began a new era of Apple design that would heavily influence the iPod released a year later. But the G4 Cube didn't just look good, it also included many new internal technologies like its cooling system that didn't require a fan, allowing for silent operation. It also had a lock mechanism that allowed the electronics inside to be lifted out, so users could easily swap out parts as needed. It also delivered on power, offering the same performance as the Power Mac G4 inside an enclosure 1/4 the size. It was Jobs' dream computer, and he spared no expense in creating it. But when Jobs discovered how much the G4 Cube would cost, he was visibly shaken by the news. It would retail for $1,800, $200 more than the Power Mac G4 Tower, Apple's highest performing machine. This was a huge problem, since Jobs was targeting a market between the low-end iMac and high-end G4 Tower. But due to its premium price, the G4 Cube wasn't accessible to those users. And for those professional users who wanted a powerful machine, it didn't make sense to spend the extra $200 on the G4 Cube, since it didn't offer extra performance, just a more attractive enclosure. When the product was released, it impressed tech journalists and industrial design groups, but it didn't make sense to customers. Sales of the G4 Cube were disappointing, reaching just 1/3 of Apple's expectations, and causing them to miss their end-of-year revenue target by $90 million. Apple tried to remedy the poor sales by lowering the computer's price to $1,500, making it more affordable than the G4 Tower, but it proved ineffective as sales continued to decline. By July 2001, a year after its introduction, Jobs issued a press release announcing that production of the G4 Cube would be suspended indefinitely. And since then, the computer has faded into obscurity as Apple shifted their focus to more successful products like the iPod. Now, let's jump to 2007, when Apple was celebrating the successful release of iPhone. It already had many useful native apps like SMS messaging, Safari, and iPod, but there was pressure from developers to allow third-party apps on the platform, and there were 2 ways to do it. Limit developers to web apps, which were essentially websites optimized for mobile devices, or create an entire app store where Apple would offer third-party apps for users to download. Developers wanted the second option, but Steve Jobs stuck to web apps, and his reasoning was sound. They wouldn't have to manage an SDK for developers, they wouldn't have to create and operate an entire marketplace, which can be expensive, the web apps wouldn't break when a new version of iOS was released, and the apps could be accessible from any device. It appeared to be a winning strategy, but there was one problem. creating a Wild West web app ecosystem delivered a poor user experience, and it didn't give Apple or developers an effective way to monetize apps. And while users may not worry about the profit potential of web apps, it does affect developers' motivation to create quality apps for the platform. And just like iOS needed high-quality third-party apps, you need a high-quality website for your business. That's why I chose Squarespace to build AppleExplained.com. They offer a website builder that's easier to use than anything else on the market and delivers beautiful results thanks to their incredible templates. Squarespace automatically optimizes your website for mobile devices, so you don't have to waste time creating a desktop and mobile version of your site. They have built-in analytics tools that report page views, traffic sources, time on site, most read content, and more. You can create an exclusive paid membership area just like on YouTube, and you can even create an entire e-commerce store to sell physical or digital items. I actually did that a couple years ago to sell merch, and it was way easier than I imagined. Also, if you Google Apple Explained, my website is one of the first results. That's because Squarespace has the best search engine optimization tools that'll make your website more visible to more people. So go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/AppleExplained to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Alright, so Eddie Q led the charge against Jobs' approach to apps. Q believed that Apple should take the challenging path of creating and operating an app store, developing an SDK so developers could easily create quality apps, and review each app submitted to the store before being published. That way, Apple could ensure apps weren't riddled with malware, wouldn't exploit someone's personal data, and actually functioned as advertised. Also, apps would run smoother and be highly optimized, just like the native apps that Apple created for iPhone. When it came to profit, an app store definitely made more sense. Apple had no way of taking a cut from purchases made through a website in Safari, but with their own payment system inside their own store, Apple could claim a commission to bring in extra revenue. Developers also benefited, since they had more ways to make money. Instead of simply serving ads on a website, they could utilize in-app purchases and subscription models to bring in even more cash. But despite these arguments, the original iPhone was released alongside a web app ecosystem that Apple promoted on the product's website. Many people weren't happy. Developers wanted access to Apple's APIs so they could create native quality apps for iPhone, rather than settle for a mobile-optimized website. Users also weren't happy. Trying to browse web apps and bookmark them for easy access later wasn't the most straightforward process. Lastly, and perhaps most important for Apple, users began using web apps to jailbreak their iPhones, which allowed for unauthorized functionality that Apple had no control over. So Jobs wrote a public letter in October 2007, making it clear that Apple would take a new approach to apps. He wrote, "Let me just say it. We want native third-party applications on the iPhone, and we plan to have an SDK in developers' hands in February. We're excited about creating a vibrant third-party developer community around the iPhone and enabling hundreds of new applications for our users." And that's exactly what happened. In its first weekend, over 10 million apps were downloaded, and less than a year after the store's launch, it was filled with 50,000 different apps. The App Store was an instant hit, despite Steve Jobs' initial hesitations. Now let's go to 2010, when Jobs introduced a new service called iTunes Ping. He described it as sort of like Facebook and Twitter meets iTunes. It's a social network all about music. Ping was built into the latest version of iTunes and allowed users to follow their favorite artists, comment on posts, and view their friends' activity. Ping could also be accessed on iPhone and iPod Touch through the iTunes Store app. Now at launch, over 1 million users signed up for Ping in its first 48 hours, but issues with the service were clear from the start. First, Facebook integration that Jobs demoed on stage was removed due to failed negotiations between the two companies. That meant there was no easy way for users to locate their existing friends who might also be using the service. Second, Ping was flooded with spammers just 24 hours after going live. They would create several iTunes profiles and post scam links to websites that falsely promoted a free iPhone or iPad if users completed a survey. These links appeared in comments of posts from popular artists like Britney Spears, Lady Gaga, and Katy Perry. It took Apple over 4 hours to remove the links and led to allegations that Apple hadn't included spam filtering in Ping, which was not only embarrassing for a company Apple's size, but also surprising since they appeared to be filtering profile photos. Adding to the mess, fake artist profiles also began appearing, with Ben Folds being one of the first to mention the problem on Twitter. So with the lack of Facebook integration, annoying spam, and fake profiles, Ping became a nightmare for users and artists alike, almost immediately after its introduction. The service never gained much traction and was eventually shut down after 2 years of activity. Now let's move on to the last 2 times when Steve Jobs was wrong. Both of these poor decisions can be attributed to Jobs' philosophical stubbornness when it came to display size. First, with the iPad in 2011. At that point, the 9.7-inch iPad had been on the market for a year and was selling extremely well, but competition was beginning to emerge. Android-based devices, most measuring about 7 inches, were slowly starting to find their place in the market due to their compact size, light form factor, and low price. But Steve Jobs strongly believed Apple had an advantage with the 9.7-inch iPad, since its larger display was necessary for a comfortable internet browsing experience. But Eddie Q, Senior Vice President of Internet Software and Services, tried to convince Jobs otherwise. He sent out emails to the leadership at Apple, citing his own experience as evidence for why a 7-inch iPad was a good idea. He eventually sent his colleagues an article titled, "Why I Just Dumped the iPad. Hint, Size Matters." Q and many others apparently felt that as long as competitors were successfully selling smaller tablets, Apple could do the same with the iPad. While Jobs was hesitant, the potential to compete with the Amazon Kindle and Barnes & Noble Nook for book sales was a compelling thought. Eventually, Q's efforts paid off, and Cook, Apple's acting CEO, agreed to develop a 7.9-inch iPad model. On November 2, 2012, the first generation iPad mini was officially released for $330. That was $170 less than the standard iPad. It was an instant success, outselling the iPad in its first year, which came as a surprise to Apple and solidifying the device's lead in the tablet market. But that wasn't the only mistake Jobs made regarding screen size. He also felt larger smartphone displays were unnecessary. In his opinion, a phone should be created to fit beautifully in the hand, and that meant every part of the screen being within reach of your thumb. Otherwise, using the phone one-handed would be unwieldy and awkward, which isn't the type of experience Jobs wanted customers to have with Apple products. Under his leadership, Jobs never increased the iPhone's 3.5-inch display, despite high demand from customers. It wasn't until 2012, when Tim Cook was CEO, that they released the iPhone 5 with a 4-inch display, and the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus in 2014 with even larger 4.7 and 5.5-inch displays. Those models proved to be Apple's most successful at that point and allowed them to compete more effectively with Android. Alright guys, so that was 5 times when Steve Jobs was wrong. Thanks for watching till the end, and don't forget to subscribe to help decide which video topics I cover.